From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
Good morning and welcome to this week's edition of Face the State on the Montana Television Network. I'm Mike Dennison, MTN's chief political reporter. Just 10 days ago, the Montana legislature wrapped up its 2019 regular session. We've already reported on the highlights of that session, including the continuation of Medicaid expansion, approval of hundreds of millions of dollars for public building projects all across the state, a new state budget, and some proposals meant to help business expansion in Montana. But today we'd like to dive a little bit deeper into the details and outcomes of the session and what they mean for Montana. To help me do that, we have two leading lawmakers who were right in the thick of things during the past 4 months in Helena. Senate President Scott Sales, a Republican from Bozeman, and House Minority Leader Casey Schreiner from Great Falls. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with you, Senator Sales. Republicans, of course, controlled majorities in both houses. You certainly had some priorities when you came into the session. Let's talk about what they were and how do you rate your record in terms of accomplishing some of those priorities?
Well, as Republicans, most of us are fiscally minded in terms of trying to be conservative in that area. So one of my goals was to pass a budget lived within its means without a tax increase. We had a myriad of bills that would help the private sector economy, targeted tax relief, bills that would hopefully reduce the cost of prescription drugs as well as insurance premiums for people. So it's a mixed bag. Those latter bills passed. For the most part, we'll see, whether or not they'll clear the governor's desk. Mm-hmm. And, the budget for the most part, we did live within our means. There was some more targeted tax increases that happened. I certainly wasn't in favor of those and didn't vote for them, but, as you know in Helena, you don't get all of what you want. In fact, you get very little of what you want. So, I think there were some really good things done for Montana. We passed a public lands type bill that should open up public land behind private land that will incent private landowners to enter into those agreements with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. That's something we've worked on for years, and I was glad to see that pass. So there were some definitely good highlights that happened in the session. So, like I said before, it's a mixed bag in Helena, and if you think you're going to get your way on everything, you're going to be sorely mistaken at the end of it.
When you mentioned the public lands one, which didn't get a lot of publicity, just a little bit, and we'll come back and talk in detail about some of the things you mentioned too. Representative Schreiner, what about for you? Democrats are in the minority, but as we heard on the final day of the session, you accomplished some major goals. What were they and how did you do it?
Yeah, Mike, I think you, in your opening to the program, you listed many of the major accomplishments and goals that we as the Democratic Party had set out. One was making sure that we finally, after over a decade, put forward an infrastructure package and pass it so we get shovels in the ground, people to work and get some buildings built and some roads fixed. Second, obviously, which is the biggest priority, was making sure that 1 in 10 Montanans no longer had to worry about what their healthcare future looked like. We extended Medicaid expansion, which was the right thing to do. That program's been a success and it will continue to be a success. We actually improved on the budget. We reinstituted some funding and some programming to help children and families. As a Democrat, I'd like to say I'm also fiscally minded, and all those things are going to help Montanans be prosperous and grow our economy into the future. And one of the things the last time I was on the program I mentioned was the firefighter health and safety presumptive. It was kind of embarrassing that in our state we were one of the last to actually take care of our first responders and firefighters, and we finally got that done this session.
And now explain to people what that bill actually did, the presumptive illnesses for firefighters. I mean, people hear that, I'm not sure they know what it means.
Yeah, so essentially in most other states, almost all other states, if a firefighter, now that fires we're burning chemicals, we're burning synthetic products, those are cancer causing agents, and what we found is a dramatic increase in cancers showing up in firefighters down the road once they get out of firefighting. Montana finally passed a bill that said that if you contract one of these or develop one of these forms of cancer down the line, we're going to presume that it came from your day job, because at the end of the day, there are provisions in there that said you can't be a smoker, you can't be a tobacco user, you have to do a physical. So we covered all the bases for the people of Montana so that we can narrow the focus down to knowing that they got sick because of their job and we should take care of them.
Okay. Senator Sales, of course, we talked about some things, Medicaid expansion, other things. There were some tax increases that the Republican leadership did not support, and so you had some Republicans going against the leadership and joining Democrats to pass these. As a leader of the Republicans, is this kind of a permanent fixture of politics in Montana? What's your thought on why this is happening?
Well, this has gone on for years. Certainly, our party is, in my opinion, much more diverse than the Democrats. If you look at any given vote on any given day, the Democrats vote in a unified, for the most part. They have a member here and there that'll branch off and go a different direction. But Republicans are very independent. That's our strength and that's our weakness. Our strength is, the reason why that's a strength is we come up with a lot of good ideas. The weakness is when it comes to execute, we can be all over the map. So, we've tried it a bunch of different ways over the years. There is a certain faction. It's less than the majority of the Republican caucus tends to like to spend more money than those of us. And they tend to go over with the Democrats and vote on these social programs like Medicaid expansion or pre-K or whatever they might be. It's nothing new. It's been something that I've dealt with since I've been in leadership, all the way back to the 2007 session when I was Speaker of the House. I think what it's going to take is a Republican governor with the veto pen, and that will unify the Republican caucus more than anything else. So that's a subject for a different show. But
actually, I was going to ask Representative Schreiner that very question. I mean, Democrats have been able to take advantage of this in some instances in the last several sessions. What happens if there is a Republican governor? What then?
Well, I think the proof's in the pudding and what we've done session after session, being that we've been in the minority at least all the time I've been in the legislature, and we've accomplished many, if not the majority of our goals over time. In this session, as I said, there's one or two things that we didn't get done. Everything else we kind of cleared the plate on. I would say that we vote as a block because Democrat solutions are pragmatic and they're good ideas, and we can get 51% of people on board. I would point to a number of the bills that passed, even if they had a Republican's name on them in the end. Those were originally Democratic bills that got picked up by a Republican and carried forward. But it still took 42 votes, at least in the House, and usually a 20 votes of Democrats in the Senate to get over that 51% threshold. So I think we'll continue that way. I think that there's no question. One of the things you learn from being in the minority party is that you have to have compromise solutions, and you have to be focused on bringing people around a table and being willing to have those conversations. And you're not going to get everything you want, but you should go in knowing what your values are. And we have yet to compromise in our values and still get almost everything done this session.
But I would think that if the governor's a Republican, I would think your ability to actually pass things is going to be minimized. You can stop things, but you're not.
And I think that's something that we have to consider. But at the end of the day, every bill that we passed was a bipartisan bill. So there's nothing that tells me if they're Montana-focused solutions that are going to grow our economies and help families around our state, whether it's a Republican governor, Democrat governor, Libertarian, they're going to do hopefully what's best for the people of Montana. And I believe many of the, if not all of the Democratic ideas fit that mold.
One last thing in this regard, and kind of a wonky thing, but I just wanted to ask you, Senator Sales, and I also had a question for Mr. Schreiner as well. At the very end there of the session, Senate Majority Leader Fred Thomas, and also in the House as well, they wanted to change the rules to give you a little bit more control over the interim committees between now and the next session. Why that move?
Well, we run partisan races for a year or 6 months, and one party or the other prevails in that. And then you go to Helena, and it's a partisan setup for 4 months. And then we have this very odd situation that doesn't really, you don't see it in hardly anywhere else around the country. And then we have this nonpartisan interim process that goes on.
With an even number of people on each committee.
Right, regardless of the makeup of the legislature. Yeah. So you almost have 60 Republicans in the House, and you have 30 Republicans. You would think that in the interim, those the membership of these interim committees might reflect the makeup of the legislature, but it doesn't. It reverts to 50-50. And we've had situations in past interims where there's been a deadlock, and in some situations, and I don't want to get down into all the details, but it is an advantage for the administration and the bureaucrats when the legislature can't come to a majority. So there's been a discussion for a long period of time whether that serves the people of Montana best. I don't think it does. I think that there should be some sort of ability to break a gridlock in these interim committees, and basically that was the rule change. And our thought, and I agree with Senator Thomas on this, is that our rules, how we operate, trump statute, and there's a lot of basis for that, or in Mason's Law. And if you talk to groups like NCSL, National Council on State Legislators, their parliamentarians and legal people tend to agree that rules should trump a statute. And so that was what that was an effort to try to bring a little, in a very small sense, the ability for the majority party to have a little bit more say in the interim process.
And we should explain to our viewers that attempt to do what Senator Sales is describing failed on the last day of the session. And Representative Schreiner, why shouldn't these interim committees be controlled by the majority party? Why should they be split 50-50? Why, I mean, they're kind of working on policy and doing things that are certain important. Why shouldn't they be that way?
Well, I think that the structure of Montana's government, specifically its legislature, is unique and was set forth that way on purpose. I think that you have partisanship through elections. I think that extends into the legislative session. But I think at some point, the people of Montana, now when we sit down at these interim committees, it's important to remember it's not about the individual legislature. That's you bringing your constituency to the table. And I think that the process of having them be bipartisan, bicameral, means that we have an opportunity to do real research work, dig down into issues. It's not about the session. Bills can come later, and bills do come. Oftentimes when, like Senator Sales said, the committees will lock up, you'll still have legislators bring legislation out of there. But there's been some times that we've had great legislation that have come out of those interim committees in a bipartisan way, and that's what I think the focus of those should be. It's bipartisan. I mean, Hannah's Act, for example, focus on missing and murdered Indigenous women, came out of an interim committee, got championed by a member of the Democratic caucus, but at the end of the day, that was a bipartisan bill because it came out in a bipartisan fashion because it has to. If it's going to go through the process, it's the one place I think that the people of Montana know that they don't have to deal with the partisanship games that I think people all across their state, as elections just start blending into each other, they don't have to deal with that during the interim as much as not that it goes away completely, but you just don't have to go into expecting it to just be another campaign opportunity for one party or the other.
Okay. Now, Senator Sill, despite some of these tensions that we've been talking about, I think the general consensus is that at this session things went pretty smoothly. People treated each other pretty professionally. The GOP majority passed the state employee pay raise early in the session. You passed public school funding early in the session without any controversy. Why did that happen?
Well, if you go back like to 13 and 15 legislatures, my first two in the Senate, there was a definite difference in the leadership style in those two sessions, particularly in the 13. And quite frankly, nothing more was accomplished than what we have gotten done from a conservative standpoint or from a Republican standpoint, except for there was a lot of harsh words that were emitted, and there was tension on the floor of the Senate. And when I came in to be Speaker in President in 2016, along with Fred Thomas, we have been around a considerable length of time by legislative standards, and we decided to take a different track. We wanted to return to more civility, and that we conduct ourselves in a professional manner, and that we weren't dilatory, and so it was done by choice that we were going to rise above some of this in-party fighting that we'd seen in the past and conduct ourselves in a more statesmanlike fashion. And I think it's paid dividends for not just us as a caucus, but for the body as a whole. So it was a decision that was made that we wanted to go a different direction from a leadership standpoint. Not that we changed our politics. I haven't changed the way I voted at all. I still didn't vote for Medicaid expansion because I don't think, quite frankly, we can afford it in the long run. I didn't vote for many of the spending and tax increases, but at the end of the day, I'm only responsible for my one vote, and if I can convince people to go with me on the merits of my argument, then that's the way it goes. But it doesn't mean that we can't conduct ourselves in a civil fashion, and I think we did a very good job of doing that.
And Representative Schreiner, it seemed like the House, there's a few times that people were got a little tense, got a little testy, but generally it seemed like people worked together pretty well and took care of business.
Yeah, I mean, I think the speaker and myself got together very early and reflected on things that had happened in previous sessions and said we need to, the institution is important. It's important that we raise the profile of the institution so people believe in the legislature as a whole, since in a lot of ways the decisions that get made in Helena have more direct day-to-day impact on your life often than what happens, in DC. And so I think we got together early, had that conversation. Yeah, we had some dust-ups. Now, mind you, we know the House has twice as many people as the Senate. People run for office every 2 years. We have a big turnover. So it's a self-healing body and self-correcting. And when we did have dust-ups, I think that happened. And I was not shy at all to get up and express my concern when people were out of line. But for the most part, I think it ran well. And I think the people in Montana, I was in the grocery store yesterday and I had 2 random people come up to me and actually talk about how professional the session seemed and how, and truthfully, both of them admitted that they were Republicans and they just appreciated the fact that people seem to work across the lines to get big things done for the people of Montana. And they haven't seen that in their lifetime. So I think it was a pretty successful session as far as being collegiality, being cordial, and just focus on getting work done.
Now, Senator Stills has mentioned some of the tax increases, and so have I. Of course, we had Democrats voting with Republicans to raise the bed tax, raise the aviation fuel tax, raise the investment advisor fees, and it was said on the floor, I think, by someone, Democrats never vote to reduce taxes, they're always voting to increase taxes, which they did on those occasions. Is that a fair statement or not?
I don't think that's a fair statement. I think that the problem that we run into is that the opportunity exists. I mean, look, we had Democrats vote for reducing taxes when some of those ideas came forward. The other piece to it is that what we prioritize are the people of Montana, and when the people of Montana step up and say, we demand a service to be paid for, we saw it coming out of the special session last time. There were some services cut and some people were hurt, and at the end of the day, we're going to listen to those people. I mean, we all are just there representing the folks back home. When the folks back home say, it's terrible that we've made these cuts, these services should exist. Well, at the end of the day, we're going to do what we can to fund those. I will tell you that the taxing system is very complex, and there tends to be winners and losers. And at some point, when you vote to get rid of some and to add some, you're making a decision on your values and who you want to benefit. And what you're going to see Democrats do every time and time again is we're going to focus on middle class Montanans. We're going to focus on the folks that could use some economic prosperity or a leg up, and we're going to try to reduce there. And the folks that have had all the opportunities in the world handed to them, or they've worked very hard for, either or. I think that we're going to focus on trying to help the broader spectrum of the people of Montana.
Senator Sills, there wasn't much talk about really taking a good look at our tax system. And I'm wondering, do you think that's needed, and what's it going to take for that conversation to actually happen and possibly move towards something substantial?
Well, I think the overall Montana tax structure does need to be looked at. The economy's changing. Everybody knows that they're buying more goods and services online. That completely avoids property tax and the brick and mortar companies that are out there on Main Street. They're paying the full freight. Companies like Amazon and some of these other online companies, they just reap the benefit of the sale, and they really don't contribute to the local economy in a meaningful way. As you know, and as most Montanans know, we don't have a sales tax, so at this point we can't recruit anything from these companies that are operating out there on the internet. So I think in the long run, we're going to have to take a look, an in-depth look at the overall tax structure of Montana, because the economy is changing and our local businesses are at a disadvantage. So, and they're the people that employ the folks and pay for Little League baseball and all the things that go on. So I think it's imperative at some point that the overall tax structure is looked at, and I think it's going to require probably a governor from a different body in order for that to be accomplished.
A different party, you mean?
Different party. I said body, but I think that's probably what it'll take. The Democrats have been totally opposed to even taking any type of look at a sales tax, unless it's a local option sales tax or a sales tax for a vacation area. But at some point, we're going to be forced to look at it in some form.
I didn't see any interim committee with a sales tax or tax study. I don't recall any. But
well, there's actually 2 tax studies that I think passed this session. There's the revenue and Transportation, or now just Revenue Committee, will focus on taxes. And then I believe one of the House bills was to put together a combination of financial folks as well. And the thing is that when we talk about the tax structure, I think that it's really easy to go to a sales tax and have that conversation. The problem is that the people of Montana, time and time again, have resoundingly opposed us implementing a statewide sales tax. And maybe their minds have changed, and maybe over time they will. But at this time, we're listening to our constituents who are saying we don't want that. It is interesting we don't talk about tax cuts that happened in the early 2000s that have now cost us $2 billion to provide the services across the state of Montana, and so we're pinching pennies trying to put together services for the most needy folks in our state, when we provided a tax benefit in the early 2000s that we've never even been able to have a conversation about taking a second look at.
Tax cut.
On the highest income brackets under the Martz administration. So I think that there is a really good conversation to be had on taxes. I think you're right. I think Senator Sales is right. I think we need to actually evaluate what it looks like because the economy is changing. But I get nervous, as do most Democrats, that's just opening the door to having just nothing but a conversation on sales tax, which as of right now, our constituents have said they don't want to do that.
It could be. We'll see what happens. One thing I'd like to talk to both of you about, I think, and I'll start with you as well, and that is we did not see a bill dealing with coal strip. We had some language there that was supposed to encourage Northwestern Energy, the big utility, to buy a larger share of the power plant. Was the demise of that idea a good thing in your view or not?
I think the general premise, I think we do have something to talk about as far as what the energy grid looks like, what the transmission line looks like, but the vehicles that were brought forth were just not palatable and provided a big incentive to a company on the back of their ratepayers that, I'm in a Northwestern Energy community in Great Falls. The folks from Butte are the same way. And I'll tell you, when you have Butte and Great Falls legislators saying this isn't the right plan for Montana, you probably need to go back and look at what you're talking about. And, it's not about the concept, it's about the actual legislation in place. And the legislation that was brought before us was not palatable. So I think it's a conversation for down the line, but the fact that it never even could get to the floor, even though it was even given a chance, there was a conversation to be had that the one bill died. There's conversations about maybe we can do something differently. Some Democrats voted to actually see if there was another option out there, but at the end of the day, we were never going to pass anything. And it would have taken Democrats' votes, as most of these big issues do, to pass. That would have put the cost of this on the backs of the ratepayers. Yeah.
Senator Sills, of course, you've talked a lot about this, and it originated in the Senate. What was the main thing people were trying to accomplish here? What do you think was most important to actually do, regardless of how we did it?
Well, the main thing is that 500 kV line that runs from Colstrip to the western part of the state. That's the backbone of our energy grid, and we're not in control of that. These are West Coast utilities that own that, and whether you're for coal power or whether you're for gas power or whether you're for wind or solar, you need the transmission to get that power moved around the state. So the legislation that we discussed, and it passed with a couple Democrat votes out of the House, or out of the Senate, I should say. It enabled Northwest Energy to acquire 150 megawatts of power, additional power, from one of the West Coast utilities, and the corresponding ownership of that KV line. And the ownership of the KV line, in my opinion, was more important than the ownership of that 150 megawatts of coal-generated power. However, if you looked at the cold snap that we had in February and March, it's a good thing we had Colstrip, because when it's severely cold, the wind typically doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. And if we would have been totally relied, or even greater reliance on renewables like those two, we would have been shivering in the dark at least part of the time. So I think there was a lot of merit to what we tried to accomplish with that bill to stabilize the energy in the state of Montana. And I think it would have been, in the long run, cost effective for the consumers. You try to go out and in the original bill, there was up to $75 million that could be capitalized over a 10-year period of time. You try to go out and build a 150 megawatt production facility for $75 million. It was a bargain. I think that it was good for the state of Montana. Colstrip is a very important asset. It pays for about 5% of the property tax in the state. Tens of millions of dollars worth of coal trust dollars go into, are generated and go into the coal trust. And you know, we're talking about thousands of jobs, roughly 700 jobs right in Colstrip that average about $80,000 a year, and then all the ancillary jobs that spin off of Colstrip in that area. In fact, all the way across the state. So
But there's nothing stopping Northwestern Energy from doing what they're proposing to do, from buying that. They can still do it. I mean, we're not stopping them from doing it. They
yeah,
can bring it to the
and what this
PSC.
legislation tried to do was streamline that process to some degree. And I think there was merit to that as well. But we'll see. Hopefully that transaction will still take place because I think it's good. It's good business for Montana. I think it's good for the tax base. I think it's good for the consumers. So we'll get to see.
We've talked a lot about a lot of kind of big picture issues. Maybe a smaller one here: sports betting. We got two bills. Which one should the governor sign? Both? Either one? None? What's your opinion?
Well, I'm going to leave to Governor Bullock what he thinks he should do. I mean, I was a fan. I actually think I was a co-sponsor on both pieces of legislation. Look, when the Supreme Court ruled that this was a thing that could happen in states, I think it's something that states are going to, and you see it all across our country, are considering implementing because there's a tax incentive to it, and there's an opportunity for folks to actually increase their entertainment value at home. So yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting conversation over the next couple of years to see how this gets rolled out and see, you know, what the benefits to our small business owners across the state who will be able to take advantage of a new service in their building will be.
Now, you voted for those bills too, I believe, or did you? I can't remember.
I voted for the one sports betting bill. That was 330. I don't think I voted for the other
Okay.
corresponding one that goes through the lottery. And my support for the one and not the other was because the rake on the lottery one is much higher, and I don't think it'll be successful because the state's going to end up taking too much of the money. 330, on the other hand, had a lower rake by the state, and I think that if it's signed into law, it has a higher probability of succeeding. So I did support one, I didn't support the other.
And we'll see what the governor does. I think one's out on his desk and one's on its way. So,
Right.
And there are a lot of bills going down to the governor this past week, and we'll see how many he signs, including some you mentioned earlier about Republican bills to give broadband tax abatement to people putting broadband in rural areas, and also to give some tax incentives to people, to businesses for some new hires, which we didn't talk about in great detail. We're getting down to the end here. Just wanted to mention that Senator Sales is running for Secretary of State. You're already in the mix there. And then we also have Representative Schreiner. Are you running for anything at all? What are you thinking about it? Where are you on that?
There's a couple of thoughts. I think that, you know, right now I have a 5, 3, and 1-year-old at home, and I'm just going home to be a dad and help my wife Teresa out since I've been gone for the last few months. And we'll make a decision as a family and over the next couple of weeks on what that looks like. But no spoilers.
And are you expecting a lot of people to be starting to announce that they're going to be running here in the next few weeks, running up to the Republican convention here in June?
I think there definitely will. You know, politics abhors a vacuum. So as you see people that shuffle from one position and maybe run for governor, you know, if our congressman runs for governor, it'll create a vacuum there. I think there'll be plenty of people on both sides of the aisle that want to throw their hat in the ring and see how they fare. So. Yeah, I think the next couple of weeks leading up to our convention, I should say there'll be quite a few people.
Yeah, 2020 that will be a big election year, and we'll all be very, very busy. We come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank Senator Scott Sales from Bozeman, the Senate President, and also the House Minority Leader Casey Schreiner from Great Falls for joining us on Face the State to talk about the 2019 session. I'll be back in a few weeks next month to talk about some more political issues on Face the State. Thanks for joining us.
Montana is like